Good morning. It is Wednesday, July 21st, and it is my pleasure to be at the Sykesville Town Hall.
Call it the townhouse, but it's our town hall.
And I'm interviewing Mr. Matt Candland, who is the town manager. And Matt, tell me a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in the county?
I've lived in Sykesville going on 16 years, a little over 15 years.
And when you first came here, what was the county like? What was Sykesville like?
Well, I still remember. Let me back up a little bit.
Okay,
sure. I grew up in Montgomery County, right outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And my father was a real estate agent and real estate appraiser, and in later years really focused more on the real estate appraisal more than the real estate sales. And he used to do many of his appraisals in Carroll County.
No kidding.
And so early on, what Carroll County meant to me was it was the place where my dad worked, and it was the place that always got snow when we didn't.
Right.
Because I always used to watch the news to see what the weather, if we were going to get out of school or not.
Yeah.
And it always seemed like Carroll County was getting snow when we weren't getting it. But so my father was very familiar with Carroll County, and so when I got the job here in Sykesville, he was very familiar with it. And what he even said to me then was, Sykesville's hit on some rough times. And when I first got here, Sykesville was just starting to turn. There had been quite a few individuals that had done great things in the town that started kind of turning the town. But there was still quite a bit of vacancy, and there was still depressed a bit. And I still remember when I came here to interview, I had some free time, so I drove up Route 32.
Right.
And I remember it was at nighttime, and it was just black, just dark.
Yes.
And all the way up to 26, there was the Exxon on the right. There was a little Crown station to the left, kitty corner.
Right.
There were some old dilapidated buildings on the left-hand side, and there was nothing on the right-hand corner. And so I was looking for just a place to grab a bite to eat.
Sure.
Now I didn't make a right-hand turn. I kept going straight, and there was nothing on the north side. It was black, and I thought, where's the commercial development here? Now, if I had turned right and had gone down Liberty Road, I would have seen some.
Sure.
But it still would have been limited.
Yes.
The Walmart wasn't here.
That's right.
And it was still the whole place where Burger King, and that was Grimm's Ford.
Right. Yeah.
And the Martin Shopping Center wasn't there yet. So none of that was there. There was some shopping. Carroll Town was still the main place where people did their shopping, although it was starting to decline right around then.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I remember, my first impression of South Carroll was that it didn't have hardly any commercial development, and that was both bad and good. It was good because it was very pleasant.
Sure. Bad
because you'd have to drive far to go places.
Right.
But I was intrigued when I first arrived at the potential of the town of Sykesville. The downtown, essentially just what you said. It's got all the ingredients. It's just a matter of making it happen. So anyway, that was my first introduction to Sykesville.
I can't think of a more charming town, and there's so much history associated with Sykesville. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, it's as many folks know, Sykesville grew up as a railroad town, and it's the second stop. Well, if you count Relay, it's the third stop, but it's the second stop behind Ellicott City, and so it has a rich railroad history that goes back to the beginnings of railroading in America. The first railroad in America was the B&O. First commercial railroad was the B&O. And so from the earliest times, the town of Sykesville was involved in railroading. And later on, it became a resort town by virtue of the railroad coming out. The wealthier folks in Baltimore who didn't want to be there in the summer with open sewers and other kinds of problems. They came out on the railroad to this resort town.
Okay.
And there were a number of little cottages. They were called Brown's Cottages. Governor Brown, before he became governor, had built a lot of these little cottages for the folks to come out and stay. It was connected with a boardwalk, and it was a little resort.
No kidding.
Yeah. A lot of those homes are still here, but it's hard to tell because of all the additions which ones are which. But so at that point, Sykesville was a retreat. It was a place where people could escape because of its natural beauty and also its close proximity to Baltimore.
Now, about what period of time was this?
Probably from late 1800s. Because in the early 1820s, 1830s, when the railroad started, this was a mill town.
Right.
And Sykes Mill James Sykes' mill became Sykesville, and it was primarily a mill town, rural, agrarian surrounding area. And then by the late 1800s, you start seeing the railroad starts really picking up, really becoming an economic engine. And it becomes even more of a railroad town and a resort. And then Springfield Hospital comes in the 1890s. Then we become kind of a company town to Springfield Hospital Center. And then a lot changes in the town. The most change in this town occurred late 1800s to early 1900s. That's when a lot of the buildings went up. And, so I was going to say before, it's interesting because most people originally came to Sykesville because it was close enough to Baltimore and its beautiful setting. And that's what brings people back still.
Sure.
We're still close enough to Columbia and Baltimore, and yet it's very pastoral still, and it's still beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's like when you drive down Main Street, it's like stepping back in time. I mean, literally, it's like going back 50 years and seeing what it used to be like, because really nothing's fundamentally changed. It's still the same.
Well, the town has done a good job for the most part. When I say the town, the people and the government have done a good job of preserving their buildings, because what you're really describing when you say, when you go down to Main Street, is the built environment.
Exactly.
The built environment has been very well preserved, and for the most part, property owners do a good job of maintaining their buildings. And that built environment creates an atmosphere, creates a, Winston Churchill said, we build our buildings, or we shape our buildings shape us. And it really does. It creates an environment, and the scale is a pedestrian scale. So it's a comfortable place to be in. It's not a big shopping center with a huge parking lot in front of it.
Right.
It's a human scale that is pedestrian friendly. And so as you said earlier, it has all the ingredients. We just got to try and create the environment where the marketplace has an interest in coming.
Yes. Matt, what do you see as the future of Sykesville? If you could wave a magic wand and you could say in 10 years, this is what I want to see here.
Well, first, I think our greatest asset is our built environment and our geography. On the one hand, the geography kind of constrains how we can develop because we're in a bowl.
Right.
We're in a little village, so we really can't expand much.
Sure.
So that's a constraint. But we have this beautiful river that goes through the town. We have this wonderful built environment. So if I could wave the magic wand, I'd want to keep all of that.
Sure. And
then infill it with compatible and complementary kinds of new development. If you go up the street, in fact, there's a good example of that where we built a new, a developer built a new building where the old junkyard was. Good example of the kind of infill. And the other thing is for those uses to kind of fill in the retail uses, the restaurant uses.
Yeah.
We're beginning to see some of those kinds of things. So I wouldn't change a lot about Sykesville. I would just slightly enhance it a little bit.
Fantastic. Now, we don't have you used to have, I guess, hotels in the town?
Yes.
Okay. Does any of that exist anymore?
Well, at one time, Sykesville had the largest hotel in Maryland outside of Baltimore.
No kidding.
In the 1830s and 40s, it was called Sykes Hotel. James Sykes had built a 4 or 5 story stone hotel.
Wow.
Very substantial.
Yeah.
But in the 1868 flood, which was a flood of biblical proportions, and I'll mention that in a minute because it's kind of a fun story. Now it's fun. Back then, of course, it wasn't.
Sure.
But the flood came in and wiped the whole thing out. But in 1868, imagine the Patapsco River with mill after mill after mill all along the river. Well, where you have a mill, you have a dam.
Absolutely.
Because the dam had to build the water, and then you had a race that kind of diverted the water. So you have all these dams along the river. Well, in 1868, they had a flood where it was reported that 18 inches of rain fell in an hour.
Wow.
Okay? I asked a hydrologist if that was even possible. Yeah. She said, yeah, it is possible, but it's extremely rare.
Right.
Whether it was 18 inches or 10 inches, it was a lot of rain. So all of this rain falls all at once. So you have a flash flood coming down the Patapsco River. So it comes down, floods, bust that dam.
Sure.
Comes down, bust. So what you end up having, and the way they describe the newspaper, is you had like a 20 or 30 foot wall of water coming down through the valley.
Full of rubble.
Yeah. And breaking each dam as it goes, and maybe even getting a little bigger each time.
Yeah.
So that thing comes through Sykesville and it literally just annihilates everything in its path, along with the 5-story stone hotel.
Unbelievable.
Just knocked it out. And so from that point on, most of the new development from that point on went to the north side of the river, where it had the lower likelihood of future floods.
Right.
So that was a defining moment in town history.
Absolutely.
And you can only imagine being in that. I mean, that really is biblical proportions. This big wall of water coming down and wiping the whole town out.
And many of those mills, I imagine, never rebuilt.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think Sykes Mill ever did after that.
Now you've also had a substantial fire that came through the town.
We've had a couple fires. The biggest fire we had was down here on what they call the McDonald block, where there was a cluster of 5 or 6 buildings. In the 1930s, we had a fire, and interestingly, it annihilated the building, took the whole building out, and that lot remained vacant up until about 6 or 7 years ago, where a developer came in and built a new building, but patterned it after the old design.
Wonderful.
So it's not exactly the same, but pretty close.
You can tell it's new, but it's in the same style.
Exactly. If you go to where Samsara is, that's a new building, and so did a very nice job. We've had a few fires. Fire has not been one of the biggest enemies in Sykesville. Although every community in the 1800s, fire was a threat.
Sure.
But I would say the flood was probably the big one, and then and development pressures, frankly. At the turn of the century, we had a boom where you were tearing old buildings down and building new ones, and that can be distressful in a community.
Yes.
Fortunately, we tore down probably decent buildings and built better ones.
Right.
Nowadays, sometimes we tear down good buildings and build junk.
Yeah.
But I think it was generally an improvement for the town when we went through that big development spurt.
Matt, talk a little bit about the impact that placing Springfield Hospital Center had on this community.
It was at first controversial. There were some, and remember, Governor Brown, I forget whether he sold it to the state. I think he sold it to the state while he was a sitting governor, which of course nowadays would be a big taboo, but at the time was not.
Yeah.
So the 1890s occur. They announced they want to build a hospital. Governor Brown owns Springfield, which is one of the most desirable farms actually in the country. I think when Patterson owned it back in the early 1800s, it was one of the most desirable pieces around. And he sold it to the state, and apparently for a fair price. It wasn't it was a fair price for the hospital and fair price for him.
Sure.
And it was controversial. Some people didn't want that back then it was an insane asylum.
Right.
You're going to bring all and those kinds of facilities were, by today's standards, downright barbaric.
Oh yes.
So why would you want that kind of facility here? So there was opposition. I think as time went on, though, a lot of folks realized that it had economic benefits. That you had the stability of the state.
Right.
That meant that employment with the hospital meant stability.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of folks moved to Sykesville to work at the hospital. In fact, particularly during the 1930s and 40s, as I understand it, a lot of folks from the South came up, from Tennessee, Kentucky, even North Carolina, where they were having trouble down there finding work. They came up here. And so you have a lot of the old families here that have their roots in the South, which changed the dynamic. Before, we were probably more of an English and German, and then you get Scots-Irish and Southern kind of, so it does change. But so Springfield became a vital part of the town, and it became a symbol of stability and employment. And that occurred all the way up until probably the 1970s. And then you have deinstitutionalization, which occurs, and that's that concept where they could, with newer medications and with treatment plans, you can have a lot of people who normally would be in a hospital, previously in a hospital, can live in the community.
Right.
And that's been, I think most people would agree that it's been, the results have been mixed. Some people are doing wonderfully, and they're functioning in society. Some people are homeless in Baltimore. So it's been kind of a mix. But the effect it had on Sykesville was it emptied at the hospital. Right. So going from a hospital of 4,000 patients in the 50s and 60s, we almost overnight went to a place of 400 or 500. Right. And today we're at 400 or 500 at the hospital. That vacated a lot of buildings. Right. Which brings me to an interesting point of probably one of the most significant things to happen in Sykesville history is we now have these vacant buildings at Warfield that become the next generation of commercial buildings in the town.
Absolutely. So the Warfield complex is going to make the next transformation of Sykesville.
Right, right. So I would suspect, our hope is that you now will have in the coming years, you'll have a new kind of employment base that comes, and that too will transform the town. We tend to have a very educated population here, and increasingly affluent, and those are folks who are getting tired of a commute,
Sure.
and they're in a position where they can influence what their organization does. So Nexion Health, for instance, the reason that's there is the CEO lives locally and he didn't want to commute.
Wow.
So he moved his business here.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see more of that, and we're kind of banking on that Warfield will become a place where locals will want to drive to work as opposed to driving to Columbia or Baltimore.
But you can't beat the location for Sykesville. I mean, it is so close to just about everything. I mean, it's a reasonable commute to Baltimore, reasonable commute, not quite as reasonable to Washington, very close to Columbia. So,
and increasingly, we have people that are commuting to Washington. We have a guy on our planning commission that commutes, bless his heart, to Northern Virginia. But yeah, the commute to DC is a bit rough, but it's doable.
Sure.
And there are increasingly people doing that. But it's the comment I always get from people who come out from Annapolis or Baltimore to meet here. I didn't realize it was this close.
Right.
I planned this much time, and it only took me this much time.
Very convenient.
And when there's no traffic, Route 32 is a wonderful road. I-70 is great, and it can get you here very quickly.
Very quickly. Matt, what do you see as the future of Sykesville when you're out of here?
Well, as I kind of alluded to earlier, what I'd love to, when I leave as Sykesville's town manager, what I'd love to be able to have is a vibrant downtown where folks can want to go,
right?
To not just feel obligated to go, but want to go to eat, to play, to recreate, whatever they want to do. I'd love for our residential areas to be pretty much the way they are now, where they're vibrant places with parks and where families and individuals are living and feeling safe and feeling proud of the town. I always say, when you bring guests or relatives into town, does the town pass the relative test?
Right.
And that is, when you drive into town, does the relative say, "What a nice place,"
Exactly.
or do they say, "Oh, this is a cute place"? And you can tell the difference.
Yeah, sure.
But are they impressed with the community? Is it a safe place? Is it an enjoyable place? That's what I would like to see, and we're almost there.
Yeah.
I don't think Sykesville already has a good base, and past people have done a great job in creating a wonderful community. So,
and it really does seem like it's moving in the right direction, Matt. It's
I think so.
Yeah, just with a little more time and a little more attention, we'll be there.
I think what I worry about more than Sykesville is, frankly, Route 26, because Route 26 has kind of made a lot of the decisions that has led to places like Glen Burnie and Randallstown, where these strip areas, they don't age well.
Right.
And they, you have vacant shopping centers, and that worries me for South Carroll more than anything else. Yeah. But I know the county's been doing a lot in trying to create, encourage new development to build nice buildings. I mean, one of the problems with shopping centers, if it's not a nice building, when it goes vacant, you don't really love it. You don't really restore the building. You just tear it down and do something else.
Exactly.
If you build buildings that people love, those are the ones that endure.
Sure. And they become part of the community.
Right.
Right.
They become symbols of the town. What is Baltimore without Camden Yards?
Absolutely.
What is Baltimore without the Bromswell Tower?
Exactly.
Those are buildings that people love, and they become symbols.
Sure. Well, Matt, I always like to conclude these interviews with, do you have any advice for young people coming up today? Take somebody who's getting out of high school or getting out of college and hasn't quite decided what they want to do with their life. They may have gone to South Carroll, they may have gone to Liberty, they may be getting ready to go to college or have just completed college and trying to decide what they're going to do with the rest of their life. What would you encourage them to do? I mean, you've been around a while. You've got some experiences here in the county. You grew up in Montgomery County,
right.
And so you've seen a lot of changes in this part of Maryland. What would you advise?
Now, you mean with respect to their personal life, or if they could live here in order to live here?
Whichever you pick.
Well, I mean, I would probably, on a personal level, I would give them the same advice I've received, and that is try and develop those qualities that make you a good person. Learning good trades and skills are very important. So whether it's college or going to trade, learning those are very important. But ultimately, I've noticed that people want to be around good and happy people.
Okay.
And so if you're a good and a happy person, you'll be attractive to people. And people want to do business with you. They want to hire you. They want to keep you. And if you're, the competency is important. But I found my policy's always been in town is try to hire happy people.
Yeah. Because
generally happy people tend to be pleasant to work with, and they tend to be positive. And so on a personal level, that's what I would recommend. For those folks who want to live in Carroll County, make sure you get a good job, because unfortunately Carroll County, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, is becoming very expensive. And one of the downsides to Carroll County's success is many of our children will likely not be able to afford to live in Carroll County.
Right.
So if you want to live in Carroll County, you're going to have to make sure you make enough money to do it. I don't see a lot of multi-family housing going up here. I don't see a lot of the days of the little starter home rancher are gone.
Right.
Because land has become too valuable.
Sure.
So I think that's going to be difficult to. So I don't suspect that my kids will end up living in Carroll County, although I'd love to see it, because I think it's going to be hard for them to do it.
Yeah, these are going to be tough times in the next 10 to 20 years.
And they're not making any new land.
No, absolutely
so
not.
Nationwide, as the land gets used up, land is going to continue to be expensive. So,
well, that was great advice, Matt. I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your very busy day to spend some time with me to talk about your experiences here in the county and to share those with us for the Community Media Center. Have a great day.
Thanks.